full moon hung high in the sky, illuminating the vastness of the forest with a silvery light. John Mitchell, a renowned photographer, parked his old Jeep at the start of a forgotten trail, far from any sign of civilization. Beside him, Rex, a dark brown German shepherd, shook his ears, alert to the sounds of the night. John had decided to take some time for himself, away from the pressures of the city and the relentless deadlines. Nature photography had always been his refuge, a way to reconnect with the world around him. But there was something different about this forest, something he couldn't quite explain. An invisible force seemed to call him, guiding him to that remote location. After a half-hour walk along the winding trail, John found a small clearing surrounded by towering trees. It was the perfect place to set up camp. While he erected his tent, Rex sniffed around, restless. John noticed the dog's tension but attributed it to the unfamiliar environment. He patted Rex on the back and said in a reassuring voice, "It's okay, boy. We're safe here." The wind blew, making the leaves whisper to each other as if sharing a secret that John couldn't understand. He lit a small fire and settled beside Rex, the warmth of the flames bringing ephemeral comfort. But as the night wore on, the silence around them grew heavier. Not even the crickets, which usually filled the air with their songs, dared to interrupt the oppressive stillness. Shortly after midnight, John was awakened by a distant sound, something between a howl and a high-pitched scream. He sat up in the tent, his heart racing. Rex was on his feet, his fur bristling, growling low into the darkness. John stepped out of the tent with his flashlight, sweeping the beam across the forest. Nothing. But the sound echoed again, closer this time, making Rex even more alert. John felt a shiver run down his spine, a premonition that something was terribly wrong. He whispered to Rex, trying to calm both the dog and himself, "Let's investigate, but carefully." John and Rex moved in the direction of the sound, with the photographer trying to capture any movement or shape through his camera lens. The forest was shrouded in almost tangible darkness, with the moonlight only occasionally filtering through the treetops. Suddenly, Rex stopped, his eyes fixed on something ahead. John aimed the flashlight, revealing an ancient, twisted tree, unlike any other around. The tree's trunk bore deep marks, as if something sharp had scratched it with force. As he approached, John caught a strange odor in the air, something between rotting flesh and damp earth. His instinct told him to back away, but the curiosity inherent to a photographer seeking the perfect shot drove him forward. Just as John leaned in to inspect the marks, a deep, guttural sound came from somewhere behind him. He turned quickly, the flashlight trembling in his hands. At the edge of the light, something moved among the trees, something large. Rex barked furiously but backed away, as if instinctively knowing it couldn't face whatever was out there. John's heart pounded so hard that he could feel the blood throbbing in his temples. He took a few steps back, his eyes fixed on the darkness. The creature, whatever it was, seemed to be watching him, analyzing his movements. Then, in the blink of an eye, it vanished. Without a second thought, John decided to return to camp. With Rex by his side, he ran down the trail, feeling watched with every step. When he finally saw the campfire still crackling in the clearing, a sense of relief washed over him. But it didn't last long. As he tried to gather his thoughts, something huge and shadowy darted past the edge of the fire, too fast for John to identify. Rex growled louder, and John knew they needed to leave immediately. John quickly began to dismantle the tent, his hands trembling. He felt the presence again, closer than ever. The trees around them seemed to close in, the shadows moving unnaturally. Rex started tugging at John's clothing, urging him to run away. With no time to think, John grabbed the camera and the dog, and the two began to run down the trail. Every sound, every rustling of leaves, intensified their fear. Something was hunting them, and it wasn't human. As they ran, John heard a cold, inhuman laugh echo through the trees. He knew it wasn't just his imagination. Something was toying with them, enjoying the chase. His blood ran cold, and he quickened his pace, trying to stay calm. Suddenly, Rex stopped abruptly as if he had hit an invisible barrier. The dog was panting, his gaze fixed on something John couldn't see. It was then that he felt the air around him grow colder, a sinister presence taking over the place. John raised the flashlight, trying to illuminate whatever was in front of him. The trees seemed distorted, as if reality itself was bending around them. And then he saw it. A grotesque figure, tall and deformed, emerged from the shadows. Its eyes, glowing with a sinister light, locked onto John's. That creature was the stuff of nightmares, something that shouldn't exist in the real world. John felt the ground vanish beneath his feet as the creature slowly advanced, each step reverberating in the photographer's soul. John stood frozen, unable to tear his eyes away from the slowly advancing creature. Each of its steps seemed to bring with it an unbearable weight, as if the very air around them was compressing. Rex, usually brave, began to retreat, growling softly but without his usual conviction. The photographer knew he needed to act, but fear consumed him, freezing his actions. Then something inside John awoke, a primal instinct for survival. He grabbed Rex by the collar and, with a swift movement, pivoted on his heels and started running in the opposite direction. The sound of branches snapping underfoot mingled with the frantic rhythm of his heartbeat, while the creature let out a deafening roar, as if it were enjoying the chase. As he ran, John felt the adrenaline burning through his veins, but despair began to set in. He had no idea how to escape, but he knew he had to keep running. Rex was by his side, but the usually agile dog seemed to be struggling against his own fear. The sound of the creature's footsteps echoed closer and closer, and John knew he couldn't keep up that pace for much longer. He needed a plan, something that would give them a chance, however small, to escape the nightmare. Amid the panic, his mind desperately searched for a solution, anything that could give them an advantage. When he was almost out of breath, John spotted something ahead, a dilapidated structure, partially hidden by the trees. It was a cabin, seemingly abandoned for years. It wasn't much, but it was their only option. He ran toward the cabin, forcing his legs to keep moving despite the exhaustion. Upon reaching the door, John shoved Rex inside and quickly followed the dog, slamming the door shut behind him. He searched for something to block the entrance and found an old table, which he dragged with effort to barricade the door. The silence that followed was deafening, as if the world was holding its breath. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with the smell of mold and rotting wood. The windows were covered with a thick layer of grime, allowing only faint light to filter in. John leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath while Rex remained alert, ears pricked and eyes fixed on the door. The cabin seemed to offer minimal protection, but John knew it wouldn't last long. The sound of heavy footsteps outside made his heart leap. The creature was out there, circling like a predator about to pounce on its prey. Every noise made John hold his breath, waiting for the moment the creature would attempt to breach the refuge. As John tried to think of a way to escape, something strange happened. A low, almost imperceptible whisper filled the air around him. It was a voice, faint and distorted, but undeniably human. John looked around, trying to identify the source, but there was no one there except him and Rex. The whisper grew clearer, and the words, though fragmented, began to make sense. "Leave, it's not safe. She will come." John felt a chill run down his spine. Who was trying to warn him? And what exactly was he supposed to flee from? John then realized something. The cabin was not just an abandoned shelter. The walls were covered in strange symbols, carved into the wood with precision. Some of them seemed old, almost faded by time, while others were more recent. There was something deeply unsettling about that place. He began to inspect the cabin more closely, using his flashlight to illuminate the dark corners. On one of the walls, he found a faded portrait of a family: a man, a woman, and a child. Below the portrait was an inscription: "We protect what is ours." The words, though simple, carried a threatening tone. As he examined the portrait, John felt something tugging at his foot. He turned quickly, but saw nothing. The sensation was disconcerting, as if someone invisible was trying to communicate something. The whisper returned, this time more urgent. "Go. It's not safe here." It was then that he realized the cabin was not a refuge, but a trap. The former residents had sealed something there, something that should not have been released. The creature outside was not the only threat. There was something even more sinister within the cabin. Before John could react, the cabin door was hurled against the wall with incredible force. The creature entered, filling the space with its terrifying presence. Its eyes locked onto John and Rex, and a macabre smile formed on its deformed face. Without thinking, John grabbed a piece of wood and raised it as an improvised weapon. Rex stood by his side, growling, but John knew the dog wouldn't stand a chance against that monster. The creature advanced, and John realized this could be the end. At the last moment, something unexpected happened. The cabin began to shake as if an invisible force was trying to expel the creature. The whisper returned, now louder and more determined. "You cannot stay here." The creature seemed to hesitate, its eyes fixed on the symbols carved into the walls. John realized that the symbols were the only thing keeping the creature under control. They were weakened, but still held some power. With a desperate cry, John began to destroy the symbols, hoping this would release the force that could stop the creature. As soon as the last symbol was destroyed, the creature let out a deafening scream and retreated. The cabin shook violently, and John knew he needed to get out of there. He grabbed Rex and ran outside as the structure collapsed behind them. Outside, the air was heavy, as if the forest itself was sighing with relief. The creature had disappeared, but John knew this wasn't the end. Something had been unleashed that night, something he still didn't fully understand. But for now, he and Rex were alive, and that was all that mattered. John kept walking through the forest, carrying Rex carefully. Every step he took, he felt the weight of exhaustion and pain, but the determination to save his friend was greater. The night seemed endless, and the shadows of the trees followed him like a constant reminder of what had happened. Rex was weak but still breathing, which gave John a glimmer of hope. He knew he was far from civilization, but he couldn't stop. John's mind was focused on finding help, on making sure Rex would survive. He wouldn't let his loyal companion's sacrifice be in vain. After what felt like hours of walking, John spotted something between the trees, a sign of light. His heart raced as he moved toward the glow, hoping it was a house or a camp. As he got closer, he realized it was a small, illuminated cabin, very different from the one he had encountered before. He knocked on the door urgently, desperation growing inside him. The door was opened by an elderly man, who looked tired but had eyes that reflected wisdom and compassion. Without a second thought, John explained what had happened, begging for help to save Rex. The man, without asking questions, led them inside and began tending to Rex. He seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, but there was a calmness in his movements that conveyed a certain confidence to John. The old man treated Rex with care, using herbs and techniques that seemed ancient, almost forgotten. John watched, still gripped by anxiety, but at the same time, he felt a spark of hope. The cabin was filled with symbols and objects that reminded John of what he had seen in the forest, but here, they didn't seem threatening. They felt protective. Hours passed as the man cared for Rex. John could barely breathe, watching every movement, waiting for a sign of improvement. Finally, the old man looked at John, smiling faintly. "He's strong," the man said. "He'll survive, but he needs time to recover." John felt a wave of relief wash over him, tears finally streaming down his face. He hugged Rex gently, feeling the dog's breathing become steadier. "Thank you," John whispered, gratitude evident in his voice. With Rex resting, the old man sat down next to John and began to talk about the forest and its ancient traditions. He explained that the creature John had encountered was an ancient entity, a malevolent spirit that had been imprisoned in the forest for centuries. It had been freed by some mistake, some disturbance in the balance of the place. And now, it was determined to destroy everything in its path. "You weren't meant to encounter it," the old man said. "But fate is strange, and sometimes it crosses our paths with forces we don't understand." John listened in silence, the old man's words echoing in his mind. He had entered that forest seeking peace and inspiration, but he had found something much greater and more dangerous than he could have imagined. In the days that followed, John stayed at the cabin, helping Rex recover. The old man offered shelter and wisdom, sharing stories about the forest and the ancient forces that still inhabited the place. John knew that at some point he would have to return to his normal life, but he also knew he couldn't simply forget what he had experienced. When Rex finally started to stand again, still weak but full of life, John made his decision. He couldn't let what happened be repeated. He had to make sure the creature never escaped again. With Rex by his side, still a bit debilitated but determined, John prepared to return to the forest. The old man, understanding his decision, offered him a set of protective symbols and instructions on how to restore the seal. "You are brave, but remember, the forest is alive, and it can be both your ally and your enemy," the old man said, handing him an amulet. "Use it wisely, and perhaps you will succeed." John thanked him, and with Rex by his side, he returned to the forest. This time, he wasn't fleeing, but heading towards danger, determined to restore the balance that had been broken. Upon reaching the spot where the cabin had collapsed, John began preparing the ritual according to the old man's instructions. Rex was alert, as if he knew the moment was crucial. The forest seemed calmer, but there was a tension in the air, as if everything was waiting for the outcome. When John began to chant the ancient words he had been taught, the forest seemed to respond, the winds picking up and the shadows moving around him. He knew the creature was near, sensing the ritual that could imprison it once again. Suddenly, the creature appeared, emerging from the shadows with indescribable fury. But this time, John was prepared. With the amulet in one hand and Rex by his side, he faced the creature, completing the ritual with courage and determination. The final words of the ritual echoed through the forest, and the creature was enveloped by a blinding light that pulled it into the ground. John stood firm, feeling the amulet's power protect both him and Rex. With one last cry of rage, the creature was sucked into the earth, and the seal was restored. The forest fell into a deep silence, but this time, it wasn't oppressive. It was the silence of peace, of restoration. John fell to his knees, exhausted but relieved. He had fulfilled his mission, and the forest was safe once again. John and Rex began the walk back, their hearts lighter but their minds still reflecting on everything that had happened. They had faced something beyond comprehension, but they had survived, and now they could return to civilization, with a newfound respect for the unknown. As they walked, John felt that he had changed profoundly. He knew that the experience of that night would mark him for the rest of his life, but he also knew that he had done what was right. Back in the city, John decided to share his story, but in a veiled way, through his photographs and stories that captured the beauty and mystery of nature. He knew that few people would believe what had truly happened, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that he and Rex were together, alive, and ready for whatever came next. And so, John Mitchell and his faithful companion Rex moved forward, with a new understanding of the world and what truly matters. Life would continue, full of challenges and mysteries, but they would be ready to face them together. If you enjoyed this thrilling story and want to hear more incredible tales like this one, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share with your friends. We have many other adventures that will tug at your emotions and challenge your imagination. Don't miss the upcoming stories. Join our community of explorers of mysteries and emotions. See you next time.